Welcome, everybody. Today is February 5th, 2025, calling to the meeting of the Sunderland Elementary School Committee to order, 6 p.m. Amanda's not here, so I'm going to be chairing and taking notes. It'll be a little clunky at times, I'm sorry. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of January 9th. We have a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve January 9th minutes.
Thank you. Joe, are you seconding or should I?
Second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
3-0. They are approved. Financial statements.
I have nothing new to report for the current year, other than just to get the warrants stated on the record. And when I say that, there's been no major new expense changes since the last meeting. I'm not aware of anything crazy in the building that's happened. For the record, the warrants signed and reviewed electronically totaled $67,187, and there were 8 warrants.
Thank you for the report. Any questions? All right. Thanks, Shelley. Principal's report, please.
Great. Good evening, everyone. So tonight, I really only have to report on International Night. So once again, it was a huge success for our school community. At the conclusion of last year's event, the feedback we got was to try to cut down on the wait time for food. And so we tried that this year, and it was really a huge success. So we had 2 eating areas and kind of 2 buffet lines, one in the cafeteria like it has always been, and then one down in the West Wing. And so we set up a bunch of tables with light in the hallway, and it was really, really pleasant. It was a nice atmosphere. Following the community meal, we were treated to some contra dancing led by folk musician and composer Rachel Bell and pianist Karen Axelrod. They will actually be returning to the school on Monday for a performance. They're going to be doing some work with our 6th grade students in music classes, and then our 6th graders will perform in front of the whole school on afterwards at the assembly. And then also the music educator and dance caller Imogen Mills helped out as well. And as with all of these evening events, there's so much collaboration, thought planning that gets put into them by our dedicated colleagues, and it was really a wonderful experience. Our community meeting, 2nd grade lead that was scheduled for tomorrow is now at 1 o'clock this Friday. If you have nothing else to do on Saturday night, there is the snowflake dance. Darius, are you going? Yeah. Weather. Okay. Yes. So we may have to postpone it as well. And then, and then Rachel Bell's music assembly next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to say that International Night is always great. It was even better. That really worked well, the flow, the change. And it's just so nice to see all the families, and connect. You get the open house in the fall where you see families, and that change over the last 2 years been really nice. And you get to do it again. You meet these families you don't usually see all the time. So well done, and the staff is amazing. Some people are there from beginning to end who didn't have to be there the whole time, but they wanted to. Like I saw them set up and I saw them clean up. And thank you for getting pizza for them.
Of course, yes, my pleasure. Oh, and I also want to, we also reached out to the high school, and we had 3 NHS members, Josie Fosno, Claire McFarland, and Sasha Malo help out, and they came at the very end to help with cleanup. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
We are on to public comment.
Okay, that would be me. So I am Jody Frazier, co-president of the Union 38 Educators Association, and I have a statement that I am going to read on behalf of the union. So it starts with a quote from the National Education Association President Becky Pringle, and she released the following statement on reported executive actions that have hurt students, public schools, and communities. So it says, most Americans believe that every student deserves opportunity, resources, and support to reach their full potential, no matter where they live, the color of their skin, or how much their family earns. Parents and educators agree our students need more learning opportunities, not less. They need smaller class sizes to get more individualized attention. They need nutritious school meals so they can pay attention to class rather than their stomachs. And they need access to mental health supports. They need for who they are, no matter their race, place, background, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And our students need to learn the good and the bad of our history to be prepared to succeed in our diverse and interdependent world. And then the next statement I'm going to read from comes from the MTA President Max Page and Vice President Deb McCarthy. And their statement says, we condemn in the strongest possible terms the directive that would allow ICE agents to raid and arrest students in our public schools. It is repulsive to our shared common values, and this cruel policy shatters the trust that families place in our educators, and our public schools are safe havens and inflicts lasting trauma on innocent citizens. As educators, we stand in solidarity with immigrant advocates, community allies, and all who fight for justice and humanity. We will fight against this policy with every tool at our disposal and remain committed to ensuring our public schools are spaces of learning, belonging, and safety for all students. Our own superintendent, Darius Modesto, released 2 statements regarding concerns and revisions to Title IX or challenges to LGBTQ rights. Union 38 Educators Association fully supports all of these statements that have been made and appreciate that our superintendent sent these out to ensure that our students are supported and protected. We know that not all superintendents have come out with statements supporting these marginalized communities. We feel fortunate to be in a district and community that values all of its members.
Thank you for the statement.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? This is where I promised I was going to be a little clunky. Sorry. All right, moving on to FY26 budget.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen so that everyone can see the live document. All right. So we're gonna have a little bit more lengthy discussion tonight than we did at the last meeting. As we're going through the budget process, this is gonna continue to evolve. And what I wanna say since last month when we first talked about this is while we do have some challenges we're facing this year, it feels a little bit easier than some of the prior discussions we've had. We have some relief that we can talk about. And then a couple of the expenditures that we'll get into more detail about are still sort of things that are up in the air, things that we've talked about in the past, but by the end of this budget cycle could potentially have a positive turn. So just to start out the conversation as a general info, the 1% budget increase is just shy of $37,000. We faced several challenges in balancing the budget. We presented a level service increase in January that included some adjustments off the get-go that put us in deficit. So that included ESSER grant and revolving fund adjustments, as well as significant increases to our retirement expense, which is the sick buyback based on the contract, and then an increase of $22,000 in out-of-district placement costs. Those changes alone generated a 3.72% increase on level service before we even looked at salary increases or other inflation adjustments in the budget. The budget also did include a second kindergarten class teacher in case enrollment grows. I think what Ben is anticipating currently is 17. Am I remembering that correctly? And if we have any summer move-ins or late enrollments, that could grow very quickly over 20 and would require potentially a second class. So we've accounted for that as well. That added just shy of another 2% to the budget. So the January level service budget was shown at 9.72% when we last met. Just for informational purposes, the ESSER grant was $35,000. That was our deficit from that to begin with. And then I mentioned revolving funds. So our early childhood expenses have been exceeding revenues for the last couple of years. To help preserve some of our fund balance, $57,000 in wages was transferred to the general fund. However, we have been able to offset some of that with special education tuition revenue. We have a student coming in from another district next year, so we're bringing in money there that will help offset. So I essentially moved some wages onto that special education fund and took some off of early childhood. So the net adjustment was $22,000. There were some other level service, general fund growth and non-wage expenditures as well. Minor increases, you can see transportation, that's based on the contract of almost $2,100. And then software and hardware, we had some adjustments that we made there based on actuals, primarily in the software categories for things that we are currently contracted for. Salary increases included placeholders for teachers and IAs based on estimated potential end fall in negotiations, as well as COLA increases for school-based staff, so cafeteria, secretaries, anyone else in the building, custodians, principal, and then central office. So looking at draft 2, you can see that we have a reduction here. We're proposing the budget today at 6.29% at level services. The biggest change here is that we have applied rural aid, and then we have, which was almost 65,000, so a significant number for rural aid to apply to the budget. That's about 2%. And then we removed the 60,000 for sick buyback expenses, and the administration recommends we propose, as we have in years past, to pay that on a separate warrant article, or if the town has free cash or other funding sources. I also pulled back on the adjustment for the software and hardware lines. We have been skirting through the last couple of years, covering those with funds that are not used from other expense codes. A $10,000 increase, I think, is significant enough that it's something that we should talk about and look at to begin with. But if we can't afford it, we can't afford it, and we'll continue to find ways to make it work. The one thing that I wanted to point out, if you're looking at this chart, is you can see the decrease in wages here from budget draft 1 to budget draft 2. That's not a cut in wages. It just means that we supplemented somewhere else. So that 65,000 in rural aid money was applied toward the wages to help bring that down. So we didn't cut anything to bring that number down. So level service at 6.29% is what we're talking about today. Is there any questions about that before I go on to new initiatives?
So that's for this year, this budget going on. What was it? What was the?
Historically.
Last
Yeah,
year,
so
like how much we
our current budget for 25 was at 5.05%. The year before that, it was 6.63. And prior to that, it had been between 2 and 4. The average budget increase in the last 6 budget cycles was 5.27%, which is high, compared to the other schools in our district. We did make some decisions to add staffing over those years. And then that includes 2020, where we had, was 2020 the override year?
Yeah, we voted in 2019.
Yeah.
For
So
FY20.
that was a big increase. So that's obviously driving up what that average is. I also wanted to point out that the 5.05 from last year does include a 1% adjustment for growth in the transportation contract. If you remember, we had to make that big adjustment. So we would have been around 4% last year if we hadn't had that increase.
Well, we don't have a big transportation increase this year. It's coming from other areas.
Correct.
And I know just from finance committee, I mean, things are tight at that end too, with other budgets, I know. So I know we usually have a couple go-arounds with the budget, right?
Yep.
And last year, our first go-around, were we a little high there too when we cut it down? I mean, we did a lot of
Absolutely.
cutting. So
Yep.
are we gonna have to do that again?
Yeah, so let's go through the rest of this and
Okay.
we'll get to some of those points. Those are really great questions, Joe. So new initiatives. So let's talk about things that building-based Ben thinks that we need to add to the budget. We did talk about this last month. We have a student who we anticipate will need one-to-one support based on their IEP. We are obligated to provide that one-to-one support. We did talk about existing students with one-to-ones to see if maybe there's any changes next year, maybe an outgoing sixth grader, that staff member could be shuffled into the new spot. That's not a possibility based on what we know for enrollment right now. So we are talking about adding a full position. If we cannot do that financially, if we decided or if the town decided that we just don't have the funds, we would go back to the conversation of adjusting staff. And what that would mean is that it actually is a reduction in resources. So it is a cut per se, even though we're not adding the position, we'll be cutting from somewhere else to fund it. And I also just wanted to point out, much like the sick buyback, while we're taking it out of the budget, the town will still have to fund that in some way. So it is still an expense for them. And when we add staff, it could potentially increase their labor burden as well. I've heard that, I know Hampshire County Group Insurance Trust rates are going up significantly for health insurance. I don't know where Maya's landing yet. I don't think they voted, but
It's high.
It's
like
something
15.
10%.
Yeah. The trust went up 20.
Mm.
So I think Maya will be in a better spot this particular year, but I think it is going to be a big increase. So if you were talking about adding a staff member that needs a family plan to the town's benefits, you could be looking at the town picking up another $20,000 potentially on
Potentially.
costs
I did
there.
ask at the last finance committee, when we gave a bigger percent from the town paying in for the insurance, did that change the number of people that signed up? And it did not.
Mm.
So just FYI, I mean, it didn't, like, we were worried about that, it was still about the same.
Yeah, that was a big wonder.
Yeah, it was.
So I think it's good for us to talk about these things and make sure that we are looking at what the whole picture is. We're not just asking for, general fund. We could potentially be asking for other things. So just to point that out. And then there were some other minor expense increases that Ben is advocating for, which I do support and Darius does support. But again, it's going to come down to a matter of finances. So $5,000 for building general repairs. We know we've been trying to increase that budget to keep up on deferred maintenance. And then $3,000 for general supplies, which is primarily related to inflation and cost of supplies and materials being higher. So that added another slightly over 1% to the budget while we factor in those pieces. Looking at the whole picture, the first draft was presented with level service plus new requests at 10.81. Draft 2 is at 7.38. I think that we would all agree that's higher than we're comfortable with. So if there's no questions at this point, we can talk about next steps. Good. Okay. So the story is the same at all of our small schools. The option to reduce are very limited. I could likely go through line by line on the budget, and if we have $1,000 for an expenditure that for 3 to 5 years we've only spent $500, we could lower that budget down. And if I did that to every line, I think we could come up with 10, 15,000. I personally don't recommend that. If we had to, we could, but it really nickels and dimes the budget. And if we have an emergency or need to make a purchase that we weren't expecting, never mind something major like out of district, but even just something internally, we need to have a little bit of cushion in those line items, especially when it comes to things like heat and electricity and those kind of things that do change. The other thing is reducing staff. No one wants to go there, and especially since we're talking about adding a staff member, that could be a really challenging conversation. One area with possible savings, and I think we talk about this every year, is the kindergarten. We did include an extra position for a teacher in there, as I mentioned in the beginning, but it's early. We don't know entirely how enrollment is going to play out, and this is something that we think we're going to have to ride out at least for one more month and see if there's any changes in enrollments, and then possibly make a decision to cut back that position, which would save us about 2%. And if there is some surge of growth like we had this fall, we could have the conversation at that point on how to fund a second section if we needed to. we always want to present you with worst case scenario so that we have the whole picture to look at.
So 2 quick questions, one's back from before. You said building expense was 6,000. That can't come from capital because it's not big enough? Is that, it can't be from
This is
capital
just
fund?
for deferred maintenance kind of things that happen in the building, keeping up, and repairs that come up that we're not expecting.
Right, repairs that come up during the year and trying to get away from seeing what we have, typically with leftover end of year funds to put towards projects, right?
Not capital items.
Can't be, yeah, okay. If it's building, you think that could be capital, I think I noticed, it's like little, like the tile breaks or
Right,
a fixture,
partition
light
needs to be
fixture,
fixed,
yeah,
yeah,
partitions,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And another question, to sell Ben's school choice numbers, I know we don't wanna fund things with school choice, but what, and did school, can we go back to, because in your principal's report, there's a second attachment for school choice, and does that affect, it does affect the budget to a degree, right?
It does, I think with the tricky spot we're finding ourselves in, and, this was last year where, right, so we were borderline one class versus 2 classes. And last year we had 14 applications for school choice coming in kindergarten. We only accepted 6, which were the siblings of students in upper grades. And, what we're finding ourselves in now is like, we're having more students leave in the, 6th grade, moving on to 7th. And not replacing the same amount because it's borderline 1 or 2 classes, right? And, as of today, and I know actually this is coming up in our meeting as well, we have 11 total applications, and that is K through 6, and all 11 happen to be in kindergarten.
Another thing I saw on your school choice numbers, it was like greater than or equal to 1, greater than or equal to 2, was that?
Yeah, so
There's no other boundary, there's no, so that you said greater than equal to 1, or is it?
right, so, we either vote to accept school choice or not. And so this is what the greater than or equal to relates to. If there is a current Sunderland family that moves out of town,
Okay.
right, is renting in Sunderland, moves to Deerfield, but wants to continue to have their students at Sunderland, since it's not creating an additional spot in that classroom, our practice has been to continue to welcome that family to be here. And so that's why it's greater than or equal to, in case we do have that.
Yeah, but is there a max though? Would we not go more?
Yeah,
That depends on
It
current
depends,
enrollment.
it depends on current enrollment, is one factor, and then, overall need in that particular grade level, right? And so numbers don't just tell the entire story, and there's some grade levels with lower numbers that we wouldn't necessarily recommend bringing in more students at that
Oh,
point.
yeah, no, I know. And you guys should know this from a couple of years doing this now, but when do we have or use the current numbers in terms of looking ahead to next year? So, our budget's got to go to the town in April. So if we're looking at a class that has, let's say, 16 kids right now, and that's one section. Do we use that number, assuming they're all coming back, or when do we?
I'm
You know what
not
I'm
sure,
saying?
what you're
Okay,
asking.
so how do we predict how many classes we need for next year? Based on ones if a bunch of families leave. When do we know that? You don't know, right?
We don't.
Yeah.
We don't.
We don't ask them to sign
if
anything, they're
they're
probably coming back. Or...
Right. So, basically, we are not changing the number of sections unless there's direction from the school committee that we have to reduce a section in a particular grade level and combine classes 2 into 1, and that's obviously not on the table right now.
Okay.
Or if it's obvious that, we have a bunch of students moving out and those families, then we have to have a talk administratively as to what the next step would be.
Yeah, and I know our numbers are tighter. I know we hear stories about 5th grade moving up to 6th graders. That could be 1 section or 2 sections. I know we prefer it to be 2 sections right now, and then there's the 4th grade, and then there's the 2nd grade is 1 section right now, or?
There's 2 sections in 2nd grade right now.
So 1 section in 4th.
Currently, there's 1 section in 1st and 1 section in 4th.
And 5th is 2 small groups.
5th is 12, 11 and 12, yeah. Actually, 12 and 12, we had a student.
So I think we would have those conversations about changing sections if we knew that the town really couldn't afford. So based on what we're looking at here, if we did not need the worst case scenario, if we need the IA, we approve the 8,000, we're at 7.38.
Okay.
Back out the potential of a second kindergarten section, we're down around 5.5. And if we could back out the IA and hold on that and figure out how to fund that down the road if it truly is needed, that would get us about 4.5.
And this is my last one. This comes back to finance committee because I get my foot in two doors or two pools. I hear the budgets from these other departments in the town saying 5.8 or 6.2, or it seems like the school fights more to reduce it. I mean, some of these other, where do the priorities come?
Sure.
I know it's the biggest budget, so it's got the most number dollars, but percentages wise, some of these other budgets I see are higher percentage increases. So who helps? I mean, that's the select board. The select board of finance committee is saying, okay, this budget needs more, this one does. I don't understand that part, and maybe someone can help me. You seem to work, we seem to work really hard to reduce the school budget to help the town. How about the other budgets?
And that is the select board,
It is,
you know, so we're one department of the town.
Yeah.
You know, that we have our own committee as a department, but,
right.
And as you said, it's also difficult because if, you know, police has 5% and it's, you know, $40,000 and we have 5% and it's $200,000, it's town, you gotta look proportion of what they're asking for and why they're asking for it, you know what I mean? You know, our percentage just because education takes the amount of staffing alone,
right.
You know, where highway departments can be a lot about equipment, right? And so if it's not capital or repairs and that kind of stuff. So it does, you know, it is the one area that is, it takes like a harmonious relationship. And I say this with some sincerity because there are a lot of districts, I was you know, called to some superintendents and they're sharing budgets. And there's a lot of towns where, no, they're setting numbers to come in at, devastating to the school, and it is what it is, right? And they're not having the conversation about going back and forth. And that is kind of the gray area where it's like, what is the percentage point that we're kind of making that up? Is 4.5? Can we go 5? And we're having these kind of side conversations with the select board, like, how are you feeling? And, you know, that kind of thing. And they're saying, bring forward this year what you want, what you need, not want, what you need. And then we're going to see how the other departments come forward. And then we may have to go to either all departments or we may have to say, you know, what more can you do? And that's kind of what puts us in a weird spot because are we doing all the work of cutting when we, I don't want to say work, but it's our job, but you know, are we doing more cutting than we need to versus other departments? You know, is the town flush with money this year because of something? You know, we don't know those things year to year. And so that's where, you know, communication, and Jessica has been in communication with the select board just to get this general behind the scenes before we go do our formal, and, you know, they may ask us to do a formal, especially the more we're asking, the more the information they're going to want from us. If we come in at 3, usually they're like, thank you, we're going to go meet with the other departments, you know, but there'll probably be more conversations this year. Because also remember that there's 60,000 on top of this, you know what I mean? And that's going to be the sick leave buyback, you know, that we pulled out. It's still an expense for the town. So I don't know what their free cash capacity is that would come out of.
Yes.
In some years, it's not a problem at all. In some years, they're going to say,
Well, we're also the last budget to come in, so that's a challenge too, because all these other people put their budget. So it's hard to go back to these other departments and say, school budget's a little bit higher this year. Can you go back and cut that extra police officer? And with our town being more aging, sometimes some of those budgets in the town are important for the elderly support. So, and again, we know who shows up to the town meeting, who shows up to the voting, you know, so I'm seeing a lot of numbers flying around that are higher in the other departments, and I'm just hoping we don't have to cut as many corners in the school.
Yeah. One of the other options for reduction that we didn't talk about is, that Darius and I just been throwing around too, is soft freeze, as Darius likes to refer to it, on the current year's budget, which some of you have been through before. During COVID, we did that. There are expense accounts, for example, the hardware account, which would be to buy new Chromebooks or laptops or smart boards. That still has a significant amount of money in it in the current year. Obviously, we don't want to do that unless it's worst case scenario, but I think if we looked at expense lines, we could save possibly close to 1 percentage point in the current year. That would help us bring down our number. So it's just another thing for us to be thinking about. All right, so the other thing with next steps that I just wanted to point out are upcoming meetings. So we do have our next meeting on March 11th, which is our public hearing. And then March 27th, we would vote on the budget. And I think the town meeting is April 25th, but we'll hurry to that. I think that's the last Friday in April. Is that what their day
It
is?
is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and I
Which
think,
I think, is that school vacation
It
week?
is.
Yeah.
is it?
Is it?
During
So-
vacation week?
I think so.
happened before.
It's happened.
Well, not for me.
Yeah, I know at least once for me.
Because the first Saturday is like the 4th of April, so I think there's 5.
Yeah.
5 weekends.
That's late, sure. Vacations.
I just had a quick question. You called that a soft freeze? Is that what you called that?
Call it
And I'm just
soft freeze
curious how
because,
that process works.
the idea is that you're not freezing all accounts and you're giving discretion to the principal and you're kind of going after a few of them. I made up that term,
It's great.
okay? And so, because it's talking about this freeze and the idea that we're being more conscious of our spending, if there's, the smart board breaks in the classroom, we're gonna get that repaired. Where if you had a hard freeze, it means you're not buying ammo, you're not doing anything unless it's an emergency, safety issue. You know what I mean? That's, you don't see that actually happen a whole lot anymore, or at least not in my district. But the soft freeze is kind of like looking at, okay, so we could look at professional development funds that have not been requested, and or something like that, where we're going to give a certain date. If you don't get in by that date, we're going to take all the remaining funds and use it towards savings for the following year. Stuff like it's not. No one would even notice that you're not doing that. For the most part.
And you said that was up to the principal's discretion? That's not voted through this, that's all money that's.
Well, we would discuss that, we would want the direction from the committee to do the soft freeze to accrue savings this year. And also, it also means end of year savings, you're not going to spend on, we're not gonna paint that room, what we would use with end of year savings, which is, usually, a deferred maintenance kind of thing, painting and, that kind of stuff. We wouldn't say, Ben, you have $20,000 to go of deferred, those kind of things. We're gonna use all that save, where the majority of that save, a soft would be the majority, hard would be all of it would be rolled.
Right, in the past, we've used end of year funds to help support the following year's budget or support school choice, student programming, and building maintenance. Kind of falls into those 3 buckets.
Where you would see a hard freeze actually be done, because it just came to me, is that if there were 9 seat cuts, which means that you have to cut mid-year and you no longer can fund your budget you're doing, then you would do everything you could to be able to save staffing positions. And so you freeze everything else so that you have to cut as minimal as possible in order to continue to make it through the school year until the next budget. That would be an example of like when would you do a hard freeze? That would be the perfect example of that. Yeah.
And when do you decide if there was going to be a soft freeze? That's after the budget. We're already looking at the budget being approved in a month.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to put that. Would that come later after the budget's already approved, or?
It would be, no, we would try to figure out where our ending point is and how we would get to it. So as we have a conversation with the town, and they talk about, right now, they just as we got our revenues at the end of January, they got theirs. And so they know right now their finance committee, they should be at least kind of going through, this is what we're going to have. These are the demands. Does our request combine with Frontier's request, does that make, is it doable? Do they say you need to sharpen your pencil in a certain area? Can they give us a target number? So, that.
Yeah, we didn't have the revenue last week, but we'll have it this week. Next week, we'll have the revenue numbers, so.
And we can present the 7.38 at the
Right.
public hearing, and then we can reduce it from there with any or all of the ideas or other ideas that
That's a good
may
idea.
come up.
So we'll have to communicate with the town if that's what they would like to come to our public hearing.
Right.
Or we're going to them. It's always been, there's been a kind of a back and forth. There's been a shift where they've been coming to us lately, which has been nice, but unless they have other questions on top of that, we'll go to them. I mean, we have to officially have a public hearing, but do they want that to be the discussion we have with finance and select board about where things stand, or do they want to have a separate meeting? That's up to, we kind of left it up to them.
Yeah, we have a joint meeting coming Monday and then a finance meeting only the week after. So I'll go back to them and talk about some of this.
Right.
All right, thanks.
Are you looking for any guidance from us tonight?
Are we looking to,
I guess if, other than, I don't think we're ready to make any changes to what we presented for level service plus new initiatives. So if you all are comfortable with the 7.38 as we presented it, which includes the new IA, the kindergarten position, and the other adjustments that we discussed, then that's what we go to public hearing.
I think, well, this is where I kind of go, I think that we're putting, the kindergarten classes with 2 school choice siblings is at 17.
Right.
And I think that's a healthy spot to be in, to think that we're gonna get 5 new kindergartners. I know it happened this year, but to think lightning is gonna strike twice that way in a small school, I would recommend pulling that out and getting to the number that's really what our need is, not on, the IA is a little bit different, like that is a real need, and we would like to see that funded, where we're kind of holding out of the space, waiting for enrollment to come in. Should enrollment come in, we're gonna come back to the table anyway, but I just don't think, I think it's kind of a false placeholder. So I would say, I would recommend asking us to remove that, and then that number will be at 5 and change. And that's a really, I think it's a good, it's also an honest number, not just an honest number, but it's a good number. And I'm seeing that around us, a lot of other school districts, I know that they're ranging in the size of the districts, but they're much higher. They're between 5 and 7. It happens to be kind of the growth rate I'm seeing in a lot of other districts. So I think we're kind of on the lower end of that range. I think getting lower than that is a great budget, where it used to be, people were talking about 2.5. You can't do 2.5.
We just can't vote a higher budget than presented at public hearing.
Correct.
So if we're gonna make that change, the conversation will have to come later as to how we fund it, should we need that class.
Which we did this year, and
Yes.
we survived,
Right.
thanks to you and you, but it worked.
So
Do we vote on that? I support that. I think that's a good idea, Derek.
what's your good on that?
I wouldn't want to split 17 kindergartners into 2 sections because then they get too small.
Right,
Right.
and I think let's keep our fingers crossed, but.
Right.
And if you go to the town meetings or the presentation, say 5 points, something, a lot better than hearing 7 points something.
Right. And if we did find out late, like this year, that we did need a second kindergarten section, by then we'll know about rural aid, which is sort of the big wild card, that just the timing, we are never going to know it in time to form our own budget. It's not a reliable source, but we are advocating very hard at the state level. We'll talk about that later with reports.
So I hear my other concern, which I was saying, that you can't raise it after public hearing, or you can, you said that, but not a public hearing.
Right.
I don't see any reason that we'd have to raise it. So, I would recommend putting the number, remove the kindergarten teacher and come in with and have that number brought forward to public hearing, right?
If everyone's comfortable with
I
that.
am. Do you need a formal vote?
No, just discussion.
Not
As long
listening.
as you're on the same
If your
page.
discussion would had controversy, you could vote it to issue or whatever, but if everybody's kind of comfortable,
Am I going to be comfortable with planning for a single kindergarten of 17?
so. You obviously have to do a formal vote after the public hearing.
All right. That's what we'll move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to school choice discussion.
So we've covered this a little bit, but we've received 11 applications, all for kindergarten next year. 2 of those 11 are younger siblings of students already at SES. So I'm recommending that we have 2 spots open up for kindergarten, and then on an as-needed or as-needed basis in the other grades, just depending on the class size and makeup.
I like to call it principal's discretion in the other grades.
Principal's discretion.
It would just, I mean, officially that's what it is in a sense. Because the other question I have, like for kindergarten, if we hold at 17, are we taking 19? Are we gonna take two school choice and do a lottery? You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those questions, like, you know, if people are still holding on, you know, it's just a question like, or do you hold at 17? Decision not today, but I'm just saying it's something to be considering in the sense of, you know, this extra $10,000 a year.
Where are the 9 coming from roughly? All over, or?
I can tell you.
All of our elementary schools have double-digit waiting lists for kindergarten.
Wow. They need it.
So I don't know, the one thing we haven't kind of done is look at, are the same people applying to all 4 districts
Okay.
to get
Yeah,
into our district? I'm sure there are definitely some crossovers, because
Sure.
people do try, we'll go there and we'll see which ones we get into and then choose. So it's kind of like, you know, it may not be a true 11. Let's say we open up a section, we need all 11 to come. You might be fighting amongst our
Greenfield, Pelham, Warwick, Greenfield, South Deerfield, more Greenfield, mainly from Greenfield. Yeah.
Makes sense.
And it is a balance, because you had asked about budget. You know, the current year, we're able to cover the expenses that we pay on school choice. But if we cannot replace the outgoing 6th grade students with incoming students, it's automatically a loss of revenue, which hurts us next year. So it's a ripple effect.
I think we need a motion to approve this recommendation.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second the motion to approve. Which recommendation is that? Yeah, which one is that for the 5 points?
Jessica, can you say you're being a motion to continue school choice?
That's
Because-
what she moved.
Because I actually have to submit this to the state, because they make us submit the vote that you continue to be a school choice school, and then, and follow the principal's recommendations for, numbers or something like that, so that it's clear that you made a
Got
vote
it,
to be
thank
a
you.
school choice school. Yep.
Thank you. Say it out loud. Make a motion to continue to be a school choice school, or, school choice school, and follow the principal's recommendations for school choice laws.
Seconded by Joe, any discussion? All in favor? Yes, 3-0, passes, thank you. The order of the agenda has approval of new contract for Director of Business Administration, followed by Immigration Enforcement in Schools. If there's no objection, I think it would make sense to switch the order, talk about immigration first, and then do our executive session and the contract vote.
Sure.
Okay. Talk about immigration, please.
Excellent. I just wanted to give, a presentation. I'm going to reset myself here. So I sent out a letter talking about how schools are, our school district is going to, recognize that, immigration status is not required to be enrolled in public school. And in fact, you cannot use immigration status as a deterrent to stop students from coming to school. And that was that was coming out of a ruling in 1982. And ever since that, we've said, we will take any students who are in our district and we'll educate them. And to agree wholeheartedly with the statement that Jody had read, that the fact that the government would start to look at using the schools as places to do any immigration enforcement is, I think, kind of disgusting. Educating all the students that are in our district, no matter where they're coming from, benefits everyone. It benefits those who are staying here. It benefits those who may return to other countries. It's making a better future. So I'm disappointed that the federal government feels that they can't uphold to their old standards of staying away from the school.
Wasn't the sensitive locations memo rescinded?
What's that?
The sensitive locations memo was rescinded, so
Right.
now schools are sensitive locations again, where they won't be doing immigration enforcement?
No,
No.
my understanding is they rescinded the sense of,
I
unless
have
they
that backwards.
give it backwards.
They rescinded an old memo that made them, okay.
Right,
Thank you.
so
That
there was a
not
memo
written
that
down.
came out, in the former, actually, I think, I'm not sure it was the former administration before that, is that they wouldn't conduct immigration business on school grounds or in places of worship. You know, there may have been other places as well in that list. And so the first thing that
Hospitals.
they did in the new administration is rescind that memo that they could do that. Now, and so I just want to kind of explain this. So I've attended a few trainings on this, and so just to get a full understanding of it. So in order for, right now, schools are not a public place. You know, we call it a public school, but it's not a public place. People can't just wander in and out of the building. There's the same level of privacy that a home has. They kind of said under law. So any kind of legal business that has to happen in a school building by an outside agency needs to have a warrant, and it needs to have a judicial warrant. Now, the Department of Immigration does have their own warrants. You know, if someone is in, it loses change of status and they're going to be picked up by an ICE agent, they have their own warrants, but those do not apply in school. And so, and that concern was that these warrants were going to be brought to the school and students were going to be taken as they follow through on that. So we got a training on that. I trained the administrative staff on this, and they've trained their front office staff. But we've created a procedure following, we'll talk about a policy in a minute, but I created a procedure to immediately have in place that all agents' requests must be processed through the superintendent's office. So if they were to show up at the front door with a warrant of either kind, it would have to be reviewed by the superintendent's office. And I have myself, Shelley as a backup, and Karen Ferrandino as a backup at central office with our attorney number on speed dial to review any warrants that would take place in the school. We are also FERPA compliant, which means we can't share information about students that are in the building as well. I'm saying this as more informational for people who are listening. We can't share the information. So if an enforcement officer was to show up and say, we are here to pick up Ben Warshevsky, a student at your school, we don't even know if Ben Warshevsky goes to the school. We can't share that with you without a warrant that is signed by a judge, which that level is a much higher, even in this era of chaos. When you hear about ICE raids and stuff, I mean, the judges are ones that are signing off on, there's, gang-related activities where there's, weapons or drugs or that kind of stuff. I do not believe in the current way things are currently that you're going to see any judicial sign-offs on picking up a student out of a school, unless that student is a criminal. With ongoing criminal activity, when I don't, we're going to see that at an elementary school. So basically the procedure I put in place, it explains that, first of all, it explains the access to the schools to the people working in the school, explains what, FERPA is. It also talks about, professionalism and respect. I mean, the immigration officers, while they are, a lot of people are disagreeing with what their agency is doing. Their role as enforcement officers are, treat them with respect and just try to let them understand that we have policies that we need to follow and that they need to have legal documentation. And that's the number one thing, is what I'm saying is that we will be protecting our students by making sure that the legal documentation is in place if any action is going to happen in the school. If someone was to show up with a judicial order, it's the same thing with a warrant for arrest. It's happened before, not in elementary school, but in a high school. You have to, you work with the law enforcement on that. But, we're putting in that safety line that, where families who immigration status may be in question, the students are here, you're not going to be handing their children over to anybody unless they have a judicial warrant.
And wouldn't we also have to get informed written consent from the parents?
If anybody shows up looking, we will be calling the parents as part of the letting the parents know that what's happening at the school. And if they have a judicial warrant and they can prove they have a judicial warrant as approved by our attorney, the it goes beyond I wouldn't understand
The
why
DESI
a
webinar
minor would
said-
have, I wouldn't know how a judicial warrant would be served to a minor.
Right.
Without going
So
through the parents
without the
first.
parent, they'd probably be going to the parent. So it's kind of weird that it would happen in school. It could happen in high school, but,
The DESI webinar made a big deal of the parental consent and that it needs to be informed and that this sort of builds in time and gives the parents the opportunity to seek judicial relief.
okay,
So, and that it would slow everything down.
Right.
As a
Okay.
benefit to
and
Except for the 18-year-olds,
18-year-olds would be a different thing.
right?
Yeah.
Which we had to look up. Well, we don't here, so I'm not sure.
so, again, that's the procedure, that we put in place. Now, I was given, Missy Novak, the chair at Frontier, got both and I emailed these to you, both a
Yes.
policy example and, a letter of, what's the way we call that? A letter of, someone give me the title because I can't come off my top of my head.
I got it.
Of assurance.
Resolution.
Resolution, passing a resolution. So that Frontier is going to be talking about. I would recommend that the committee look at passing the policy. That, you know, Frontier will talk about it and maybe it'll go to a policy subcommittee to kind of put together. These procedures are in place and we're following them, but over time, if I was to suddenly leave, your policy would enforce the administration to follow the same. And the policy the example policy is exactly what we're doing in our procedure. And so, and I can put it on the next meeting agenda, where we could have a draft. You could also waive your double readings. We're having a double conversation about it. And there's a time is of the essence in the sense of getting it on the books while the public is listening and is concerned, and wants to know that where you stand in taking action. So anyway, that's my recommendation. I don't know if people want to talk about it, or you had a chance to read them over. The resolution is making a statement. You can do that as well. From a pragmatic point of view, I kind of look at it like the policy, but you're making the law. It's you're passing, the other one's got the teeth where the other one is more of a statement. And I think we've made statements already. Anyway, so.
Yeah, I just had a couple questions. Like the resolution statement towards the end, there's a place that, you know, teachers could discuss this where age appropriate. Is there a definition of age appropriate, again, especially since we're elementary school? Does that come from leadership?
So this is the resolution?
Yeah,
It's the resolution. I don't have,
Yeah,
I'll be honest with you, it was taken from, I think that one was taken from the National Association.
Yes,
And so it's just, I haven't gone through it as a, you know.
It's a template. We're not accepting, that's where we would accept this later with modifications, second reads and things. Is that?
I'm actually proposing that you go and do the policy and the
Yeah.
resolution, and not do the resolution, and that the policy is going to, it's going to make the statement alone about you're setting the ground rules for how immigration enforcement will be done in your schools.
And that was another question on the policy. I guess it's assumed the definition of what a student is. I mean, because a lot of times in a legal document, it'll say definite, say student, comma, what that means, close comma, and that.
This would go into our policy handbook where we often refers to students as students.
So it's,
Yeah, I mean, so there's the definition of wherever a student is throughout our policy handbook.
right.
So I don't think you have to define a student as someone who's on our rolls as a
Currently
student.
enrolled
Yeah,
in
as a
the
student.
school. Okay, and then and again, a lot of the statements in the policy talk about not to disrupt the school atmosphere, the learning environment. What about summer activities? I think there is a statement there about after school. Does that count?
Our policies are for any school activities on and off campus.
At any time of year.
Any time of year. You know, when we are in the role of local parentis and, you know, in charge of the students, yeah.
Okay, good. That was it, thanks.
I'm interested in the policy for next month if there's no objection.
The only problem next month, if our meeting is the town, it's the town meeting, right?
The budget hearing,
Yeah,
we
That's separate, right?
we basically open and close 2 meetings in one evening.
Okay. Do we
So
can-
we'll have a regular business meeting the same evening.
Okay,
Yeah, the first half hour or so, we do the budget and then we close that and then we open the regular business.
Have school staff been filled in on this, on these protocols? Does everybody in the building know that if a law enforcement agent came, they would need to be sent to central office and not admitted to the
I would
building?
have to ask Ben.
Yeah, this
I
is
see
building,
passed
yeah.
on.
We have, administratively, we talked about this, and our first step was to share it with the front office staff and counselors, right? So Leela, school secretary, administrative assistant, school nurse, who also sometimes buzzes people in, and then our 2 counselors who are supporting some of our families this right now.
I think the other staff might appreciate hearing about it too.
Yeah.
Just as reassurance.
Did you have Tina, because Tina was sending it out to her group.
I'm sorry?
Tina was sending out an example email she's gonna share with you yesterday.
I
So it came up yesterday in the at Whately School Committee meeting, if we're gonna share this with all the staff. The main reason I was holding back is I didn't want to cause more stress on teachers that this is something that they need to do and what kind of training. Any adult who comes to the building, or anybody who comes to the building, needs to go to the office because they're a visitor in the building and be processed that way. So that really is what the instructions are for staff. They don't need to know how to do this other than all visitors wearing a uniform or not need to go to be sent to the office as visitors and so forth.
Is it pretty similar to, again, I might be drawing a tangent, but is it similar how a teacher would deal with HIPAA law? And you're not going to say anything about someone's medical condition? They're not going to say anything about their immigration?
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, technically, we don't collect that information.
Right.
So you would only know through hearsay or if someone shared that outside of school documents. But again, you can't even say a student attends the school.
Right.
I think there may be some misunderstandings among staff about what could potentially happen in the building. They might just find it reassuring to know that not just would an agent be processed at the office, but they'd be sent to central office before they were admitted into the rest of the building.
Correct.
And also the information that it would be a warrant
It
that
needs
would even get them closed, and the warrant, because they're a minor, would still have to go through their adult supervision, adult care before they can even get close to the kid, theoretically, right? I think that'd be reassuring for a lot of parents.
The other thing I was wondering about is bus protocols and what training is being offered to the bus drivers.
I have not done bus protocols or training the bus drivers. We in the thing I was on, they talked about whether or not you train bus drivers to keep driving, and then there was discussion of whether or not at that point would they then be, because once they go onto a sidewalk, they are no longer on the school bus stops are no longer, they're not a sanctuary place. And are they obstructing justice? And then, what is the protocol? They see an officer, they keep driving. Do they know it's not? It's a lot to kind of, and then the attorney that was presenting from the attorney, I can't remember which office he was from. I'm not sure if it was from the immigration and immigration, whatever office out of Massachusetts, said the likelihood of people waiting at bus stops, if they're waiting at bus stops, they're waiting at houses. And that's where they have the ability, if they have to have a warrant to, again, they're kind of saying there's a lot of what ifs. You need to really concentrate where you have the students most. Because the other question was like, let's say there's a football game. That's a public event. ICE officers could go to a public event at a football game, and they could try to attempt to, do business, immigration business in such a place, right? Because a football game, it gets a little bit different because the public is welcome to a football game where they aren't welcome to a PE class in the same place. You know what I mean? And so it gets very tricky there, and you have to work with and say that the students under your care versus not under your care. So if they're dressed up in a football uniform, they're still part of a school event. If they came as a fan,
Wow.
you know what I mean? Or are they a visiting team, a visitor from the public watching the event? You know what I mean? It can get very, very tricky. But they also said that not a likely place where ICE would be looking to do the apprehension, because how would they know the person's going to be there at that particular place and time, and so on and so forth. And to do so in a place that is, they don't want, well, maybe I could be wrong, given the political thing. Normally, they aren't looking for a big disruption
Right.
in their apprehension of people. But that might be changing. I don't want to be quoted on that, I just was, but quoted on that anymore in the sense of there seems to be a flair for the dramatics right now.
Cover your policy covered, because there's not a disruption in the education, I forget the exact words, educational opportunity or curriculum, but outside sports, band, those are part of the curriculum. So
Mhm.
a disruption that occurred at one of those events is against the policy that's already there.
And understand that the policy gives us as administrators some teeth to hold on to. If you have, several ICE agents who
Yeah.
say they're going to take, we can only do so much before we're arrested and and so on and so forth. So I'm just kind of saying that in the sense of like in reality of sorts.
True.
But they also, if they don't have a judicial warrant, they're not going to really be able to process it on school grounds and that kind of thing. So, and I hear what you're saying about bus drivers, and I'm going to say there are some, if they're waiting at that person's house, in which case the majority of house or residential area, it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough to enforce that as a school.
The bus driver also isn't an employee of the school, an employee of an outsourced company.
Right.
True. And so, but can we have at least some training or talk to them about the confidentiality part? Like, I don't know if that kid rides this bus. If they get spoken to outside of the bus, the driver.
Yeah,
I don't know where they
that can be done.
Yeah, I don't know where they live. I don't know if that kid's, I don't know what their parents are. Because we have some really great bus drivers, but they are talkative, which is great. I just don't want them to be talking about certain things, and just so they know that.
Yeah.
I also wanted to share for anybody who might not know this, that in 2021 at our annual town meeting, Sunderland passed a new bylaw that made us, in our language, a safe community. Other people might know it as a sanctuary city, where Sunderland's law enforcement is prohibited from supporting ICE or immigration activity at all, including in the sharing of information.
Did not know that.
Conway also did that in 2019. We followed Conway's model.
And Greenfield as well, has it, right? Greenfield also, I think, is a city.
I think so.
Yes.
Thanks
That's
for the
good enough.
discussion. Let's see here. Let's go on to reports. This list, school committee chair report first. Let's see. I've been continuing my work with the Rural Schools Committee. We are, there are 24 members of the MASC Rural Schools Committee. We are trying to meet with every one of the 31 legislators who represents a town that receives rural aid, to ask them to support the full funding of rural aid in the FY26 budget, which would be about 4 times as much as it was funded in FY25. So last year in FY25, the governor recommended level funding of rural aid. The House cut it in half. The Senate brought it back to a little above level funding, and then the conference committee that sort of reconciles all the different budget models went somewhere in between the Senate's recommendation and level funding. It was a very small increase this year. We are really trying to pull out all the stops to get our legislators, and our legislators for Sunderland are outstanding. They are the leaders on this topic. But we're trying to get all of the legislators to put their weight behind fully funding rural aid in the amount that was recommended by the Commission on the Fiscal Health of Rural Schools in 2022. So we won't know about the level that it's funded at until long after our local school budgets have been passed for the year. So it's not useful in the formation of this budget. I also wanted to make sure that people know that the town nominating caucus is on Monday, March 3rd at 6 p.m. I am up for re-election. I am planning to run again. But they have trouble making quorum at the caucus. Sometimes we need 25 people. So if you're a registered Sunderland voter, please consider coming. Any other committee members have updates to share?
I do it from the collaborative. It's not good, but the collaborative, I'm also on the finance committee there. is really short on budget. They've cut employees, which is unusual. They had to cut, what is it, 15-20% out of the budget that they're over budgeted. A lot of it comes from less grants. I think a lot of schools that were using or groups that were using them had used ESSER funds, so that dried up, and so they've had to do a lot of tough decisions in terms of cuts, and they're continuing. I think it was close to $800,000 they had to find to cut. Now they have a huge budget, and it's $4 million, but they had a lot they had to do. So that's the update. If you know Todd Gazin, or check in with, I know you do. You know, he's going through a tough time down there, but it's they've got a plan. We'll get through it, but there was a lot of cuts, and that's the update.
Thanks. Anything else?
I could do a little update on the Capital Improvements Committee. Got to be a little more familiar with Becky, the new administrator, and I shared our list of goals for this year. It sounds like they're working through a lot of information to organize financials and where all the departments are at. And they've requested, or we're curious to know a little bit more about the status of last year's projects and any information on the rebates for the mini splits and any details that can be offered on any of that stuff, just to see where those projects are currently at. And there's nothing really to report on the requests that we made for this year. They've just taken them into consideration.
Thank you for the updates. Superintendent's report.
I have none.
And then we're going to go into executive session. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Have a good night. Enjoy your snow day.
Thank you. You too.
Nice to know early, huh?
So the minutes template says enter executive session, not to return to public session, but I think we need to have executive session, then return to vote on the contract, yes?
Yep.
Okay. So I will make a motion that we enter executive session and return later to public session.
One second.
Yeah.
Goodbye. All right, roll call vote. Jessica, yes. Megan?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Thank you. So we will come back online. We're going to mute and turn off the camera for executive session. So we'll still be on the same link when we come back.
Okay. We can do that.
Oh, and turn off the recording.
All right, you're back in a.
We need to, hold on, sorry. I need a motion to return to public session.
I'll make a motion to return to public session.
Second motion to return to
Seconded
public
by
session.
Mr. Elias. All right, all in favor? Yes, 3-0. We are returning at 7:21 p.m.
You just copy and paste that every time. Just change the time.
Right. Okay, so I will make a motion to approve the new contract for Shelley Pareda as Director of Business Administration.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
3-0. Thank you. And then we just need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, just to throw it off a little bit.
You're right. I'll second.
All in favor? Yes, 3-0 passes. We are adjourned at 7:22 p.m. Thank you, everybody.